First up, we have a talk on how to survive crash landing on the island of DevOps, because sometimes we don't always come in for a controlled landing. So Fatima, Khalid, and Daniel Kim have teamed up to give us a talk on how to survive this crash landing, and I hope you all give them your attention. Here we go.
Hello.
Hi,
Welcome to our talk, How to Survive a Crash Landing on the Island of DevOps, live from Mackinac Island. I'm so excited to be here with my best friend, Fatima. We are friends, like in real life, we hang out in person. It's so awesome to do a talk with my real friend about DevOps. So I'll quickly introduce myself. My name is Daniel. I am a developer advocate at New Relic, and I love talking about DevOps.
My name is Fatima. I'm a developer evangelist at GitLab. I work on community and CI/CD. I really love Animal Crossing. It's basically been my lifeline in the pandemic. You know, I had these like virtual picnics and hangouts with my friends while we were isolated. So it's really exciting to connect that with tech and kind of bring that all to you and bring our stories over here.
Perfect.
Today, we'll talk about DevOps as we understand it, some strategies for survival once you've crash landed on this island, some resources that will keep you going that helped us survive, and in the spirit of Deserted Island DevOps, we'll share our stories and reflections with you. Being newcomers into the DevOps community is a lot like building your island from scratch. So when you start in Animal Crossing, you have this island with a single tent, a neighbor who doesn't really love you just yet, and a whole lot of debt to Tom Nook. And in the game, there's like this clear progression to success. Like you can harvest your fruit trees, take advantage of the lucrative turnip market, and you can slowly pay off your debt, collect villagers, and build out your island. In the DevOps community, we've seen that there really isn't one path to progression. There's so many technologies, so many people. You're starting on your own island, you're pitching this tent, you're planting these seeds and hoping they eventually bloom into fruit trees. But there isn't really a one path for all. And so we wanted to dive into what is DevOps and then like how we kind of charted our own paths.
So yeah, the most common question when I tell people, what do you do? And I answer, I do DevOps, is what is DevOps? And unlike just a regular technology where you can be like, okay, it does X, Y, and Z, DevOps isn't just one thing. It's kind of a way of life. It's a culture. It's a philosophy. And it aims to do two main things. The first thing that it aims to do is make it possible for organizations and tech organizations to deploy software more reliably. It also aims to help organizations ship more, so deploy software more frequently. And DevOps is an amalgamation of three things: culture, methodology, and technology to help organizations do those two things.
Let's get started with culture. So before DevOps, traditional software engineering was a lot like this. Imagine you're picking up your friend at the Mackinac Starline ferry dock. There are two docks on Main Street on Mackinac Island, and they're about 0.3 miles apart. So you text your friend asking which dock their ferry is going to land at, and he said he doesn't know because he didn't pay attention to the crew announcements. He can see the Grand Hotel, but as massive as that hotel is, you don't really know which dock the ferry's coming at. Since everyone is on the same paper and traveling to the same conference, you can assume that it's dock one, but there weren't any people at dock one. So you stood between the two docks, watching the water, waiting for a ferry to approach and which way it would turn. And then you finally see one going towards the eastern side of the island. You're like, maybe that's it. And as that ferry approaches, sure enough, you see your friend wearing his AirPod Max, waving to you from the top deck, and you're like, thank goodness. Before DevOps, work was really siloed between IT operations professionals and software developers. People didn't communicate that great. They were working on different departments and different ferries in different buildings, two different KPIs. So this led to a lot of unhappy customers, complicated handoffs, project delays, things like that. So operations and developers were always throwing things over the metaphorical ferry dock or passing on the blame when, people didn't listen to announcements or things didn't work out as planned. DevOps grew out of that frustrating situation. It was a way for people to do work together, to break down those silos, and to optimize the way that we deliver software. Another way that we can look at DevOps as a whole is by analyzing methodologies or processes and practices that DevOps use. We can look at these as 4 key principles. So the first is automating the software, making sure that you have the right tools and are optimizing the right tech to use to deliver those products. You also want to build interdisciplinary teams so that they're working together to collaborate across your organization. So you're bringing in everyone who needs to be a part of the project to the table. And deploy your changes and make improvements on a continuous cycle, and get feedback early, often, and build upon it. All of these things we heard about yesterday and today.
So yeah, based on those 4 principles, there are 2 methodologies we're going to talk about today that operationalize. Oh my gosh, these emotes are everything. They are iconic. I just want to take a moment to recognize that. So we have these methodologies that are born out of all the principles that Fatima just mentioned. So CI/CD is an example of how we can operationalize a lot of the principles that we just talked about. So we're building concrete ways where different stakeholders from across the organization, whether they're in security or operations or in app development, are able to collaborate together to continuously deliver software in a predefined cycle. That means that these are not just random things that people pass on Slack. There is a defined procedure where people are able to collaborate in a way that is repeatable and hopefully allows you to deploy things faster and more reliably in a continuous way, which is continuous integration and deployment. The second cool methodology that was born out of DevOps and was kind of needed in the grand scheme of like deploying things every 2 weeks is containerization. So let's say you have an application that you're trying to deploy and you're trying to scale it because it's getting really, really popular. If you onboard developers into a single monolith, like hundreds of developers, there's going to be too many cooks in the kitchen, right? I have personally dealt with that issue because trying to resolve a merge conflict, if anyone has done that before, is very, very frustrating, especially if there are a lot of developers with very strong opinions. With containerization, what folks can do is kind of break up their large application into smaller pieces and put them into containers. So you no longer have to worry about stepping on another team's shoes. You can just worry about deploying only your part of the application, which makes it a lot more scalable. So you can start building faster and larger applications. So yeah, containerization and CI/CD is a cool thing that allows you to deploy faster. So how do we do DevOps? So the third kind of facet of what we want to talk about is how we do this through technology. So we've all heard about Kubernetes since we're all talking about DevOps. Kubernetes is a way where you can orchestrate all the containers that all of your development teams are building, and you can deploy them at scale at the cloud without having individual people SSHing into various things and messing with configuration variables manually. With Kubernetes, you're able to auto-scale. So you're able to take containers that may be at very high demand and scale only those up. So you don't have to waste resources over provisioning and wasting a lot of money. So Kubernetes is a smart way where you can dynamically deploy things into the cloud without interruptions and allow you to deploy things at scale in the cloud. So much like Animal Crossing, when you build a CI/CD pipeline, there's so many different things that you can add on to this particular pipeline, and there's so many additional options that can beef up your entire DevOps process. So an example is security. So in the traditional DevOps model, security is not really integrated into the pipeline, but with security people being like, hey, you're giving me maybe 20 features a quarter that you need to deploy into production. I don't have time to do audits on all of these 20 new deployments that you made into production. Security is now like, hey, how can we as security people be more integrated into the entire DevOps process? Hence DevSecOps. So with DevSecOps, you can actually integrate security into different parts of your entire software development lifecycle, which means that from the planning stage of the DevOps lifecycle, you're able to integrate security teams and help and leverage their expertise to make your application more secure. And also, you can leverage the security team's expertise to integrate automated testing and other things into the CI/CD pipeline. So security is an example of something you could add to your CI/CD pipeline. With monitoring, you're able to go ahead and measure various things that you're doing in production and see the real-time results of changes you have made in production. So if something is just causing everything to be really, really slow, you can quickly roll that back so it doesn't affect a lot of users and make all of your villagers really, really mad with your new software deploy. So these are different technologies and cool things that you can add to your CI/CD pipeline to make it more robust and allow you to deliver software more reliably and quickly. So yeah, here's a little bit of a story time.
Story time!
Oh, go ahead.
So you've got your tent on this island of DevOps, and you've got some fruit trees, and you're really starting to get a feel for what DevOps is. Now you've got to join the community. So one of my first introductions to the DevOps community was actually at an open government conference called Forward 50. Daniel doesn't know this story because I changed it out last night. And at that time, I had heard about DevOps, and there was a couple of presenters talking about like DevOps is the future of government. And I was like, I don't know what that means, but I'm going to file that word away for later because I'm pretty sure it's going to be helpful later down the line. And then I met you at All Things Open in 2021, and I was intimidated at that point by DevOps. And when people asked me what I did at the job that I was at, they were like, actually, that is DevOps. And I was like, no, I don't do DevOps. DevOps is this big, scary thing, and I don't know how to get into it.
Yeah, when I first joined DevOps and joined the DevOps community and learned about DevOps in general, I started my first job at New Relic. And before that, I was a front-end developer working on React websites. So I was like, what is this DevOps thing? And I kept asking questions like, so is this DevOps? And they're like, kinda, like maybe. And so I could never get an answer out of what DevOps actually was. And it was very, very intimidating because every time I went into the DevOps handbook or something, there was like 30 different technologies, 40 different technologies, hundreds of pages of documentation. And it was very, very overwhelming. And I feel like this is kind of a shared experience amongst a lot of people who are trying to get into DevOps. If you try opening the Kubernetes documentation, it is very, very long. And then once you start reading the paragraphs of information about networking and a lot of these more complicated principles, it's easy to get overwhelmed, as I was in the beginning. Yes, the emotes are very accurate.
So because of that, we decided that we would share our experiences as we talked about them, about this like crash landing. And whether it was joining a new gig or escaping a toxic work environment, we found ourselves really overwhelmed by this new community that we were joining. So there were a couple of different strategies that we used that we wanted to share with our listeners.
So this is a very, very important slide, I think. This is the slide I call how to ask good questions. And here are some things I've learned just by being asked questions as well as asking questions when I was first joining the community. So the first rule is don't just say hi. I think I get DM a week with just someone saying hi, and that's it. There's no other follow-up question, it's just hi. And that is just a bad way to ask a question because I don't know how to respond to just hi. So make sure that you include your question in the first direct message to whoever you're texting. And Heidi mentioned in her talk that like don't be afraid to hit up an expert. They're in the community. They're more than happy to answer your question as long as you do the second thing, which is do a cursory Google search beforehand. A lot of the questions that people ask me can be answered by a simple Google search, Like, you don't need me to answer how to use a kubectl command. I swear there's blog posts, videos that explain it a lot better than I could in a simple tweet. Also, don't feel entitled to people's time. These are all busy professionals with full-time jobs, people who are active in the community. And just because they answer your question with a blog post they have previously written or a resource they have already developed doesn't mean that they're just kind of shifting your question. It's just like, hey, I've already answered this question here. So don't feel angry if someone answers with something that's not directly answering your question. And on the right is an example of a DM I sent Justin Garrison when I was first starting with Kubernetes, asking very simple questions about what the benefits were of deploying Kubernetes on Amazon in different services. So yeah, everyone asks questions, and I think it's really important.
Another strategy is to get involved with the community. So my favorite part about Animal Crossing is like visiting friends' islands and taking all the inspiration and bringing it back. One of my friends had the fences I really want. They were like those iron fences, and I wanted them around my museum. So I would dig up all these iron nuggets, travel to her island. She would craft all these fences for me, and I would come home with a pocket full of like 300 fences. And I was like, this is community. I have an Animal Crossing community. And so like, if you want to get involved in your DevOps community, like put your ear to the hallway track, listen to what people are talking about, what needs they have, what projects they're discussing. Maybe they're looking for help. I think I got recruited a couple times to work on security things at Open Source Summit because I was like, I'm looking for a project. And so just like keep learning about the things that you're interested in. There's lots of newsletters and podcasts, and everyone's putting out content. So follow what you love and talk to the people who do the things you love. Oh my God, yes. There isn't one path to getting involved in a community, but when you're ready, contribute back to the projects that you use and love, because that's the best way for you to help someone else get onboarded into that community and help them as well.
Yeah, Yeah, and there's so many different ways that you yourself can get involved in the community. And there's so many different ways that you can get involved based on what your interests are. Some folks are kind of skittish and not want to show their face and do a full 2-hour Twitch stream. That includes me. Twitch streams scare me a lot. But there are other ways you can contribute, like writing a blog post about something you learned recently while you were trying to deploy something. Or I know that Fatima and I do a lot of Twitter spaces together.
Yeah, we've been doing Twitter spaces at GitLab to showcase different speakers' expertise, and I think it's mostly because Twitter spaces are on trend right now. It's kind of the thing that everyone's doing. I do feel like we're at the bottom of the peak trend, but we'll see how that plays out. But also, yeah, I've been experimenting with live streams. I'm not totally comfortable, so a coworker of mine will invite me on his live stream. I'll hang out with him. We'll code together, contribute to GitLab, and I find that that is a really great way to also warm up if you're not comfortable with something, but you really want to try it. So those are some opportunities. Don't be afraid to ask people. So if they run a really cool show or podcast and you feel like you have the expertise, like volunteer yourself. The worst will happen. They'll say no and you can try again.
Also, I just want to add that doing things with friends is great, you know? Like, I convinced Fatima to come to Deserted Island with me because I wanted to do something with a friend I hang out with weekly, you know? And it's so fun to learn together with friends. So always try to involve a buddy if you're not comfortable doing it by yourself or you're a little scared.
This conference I was intimidated by, and I was like, no, I'm not, Deserted Island DevOps speaker quality. And Daniel was like, we are submitting, here's my idea. And I was like, okay. And he was like, here's a doc, let's work on an outline. I put an event on your calendar for Friday. And I was like, I guess this is happening.
Google Calendar for the win, let's go.
Also, in the spirit of Deserted Island DevOps, Daniel and I have some stories that we wanted to share with you about how we got into DevOps and our different ways of learning new things, which we figured out as we were trying to present together.
So yeah, Fatima and I are very different people in terms of our learning styles, as well as like what we like to do in our fun time, because I'll get to that in a little bit. So here's kind of my journey into learning DevOps. So the first thing that I learned when I first got into like DevOps and I started experimenting with things like Kubernetes was learning the basics of Linux. So without this, when I first tried my first Kubernetes tutorial, I think Kat wrote the one I tried or something. So it's really wild to see people that I tried their documentation and their blog posts, and they're like right there. It's wild. It's getting nervous. Yes, this is very accurate. So with Linux, I didn't understand what these commands meant. I didn't know what CD meant, I think, when I first started my first tutorial. So having an idea of what Linux commands are very helpful and will save you lots of time in the future. So this is what I would recommend. The next thing I tried was Kubernetes the hard way. And I would say this is very, very optional for folks that want to get started. This is very difficult. I can personally attest to the fact that I spent hours and hours trying to debug things with this step-by-step tutorial. But it is very helpful if you want to learn the fundamentals of Kubernetes, how basic principles like networking, security, role-based access control, very complicated things in Kubernetes. If you want to learn how things work under the hood, it's a very good resource. But if you just want to get started and just want to get your hands dirty, you can skip this for sure. This is hours and hours of arduous Googling. But this is very necessary. So what I did to first understand and learn about Kubernetes was spin up an actual repo or a project. So there's so many of them on GitHub that are open source, but I like the Google Boutique Shop because it's an e-commerce website. It's things that we've used before. So it's very, very relatable for me, and I was able to spin this up, and I was like, wow. With only a couple commands, I got something to run on Kubernetes. I was like, I'm a master. When I first ran kubectl apply and my first YAML file, I was like, wow, I'm so good at Kubernetes. Then I realized that there's so much more to it than just applying a YAML file. So yeah, spinning up the demo is great. It's an online shop. It's great. But this is where it gets a little dicey. So if you want to get beyond just applying a YAML file, you need some kind of monitoring because you want to do things to the demo app, right, to try out your new skills as a Kubernetes master, or you thought. So with monitoring, I tried things like OpenTelemetry, Prometheus, and I spun up my own Grafana instance to be able to visualize all these metrics and logs to see what I was doing. And then, this is my favorite slide. sorry, I messed up, is choose chaotic evil. So what I do is I tried every which way to destroy my Kubernetes cluster to just figure out what is possible. And I recommend, like, I know that Anna's nodding because Anna's the queen of chaos. You want to go as chaotic as possible. You want to send 3,000 users at the same time, clicking on the same resource, you know, trying to take down your own cluster. And you can measure what you're doing with a monitoring solution like Prometheus or OpenTelemetry and figure out really how to push the limits. And this is a really good way to get started with Kubernetes, mainly because you're able to fundamentally understand the relationships between different things. So for example, if you push the CPU allocation for a particular pod to a very high level, you can figure out what that means when you start sending a lot of traffic to it, like what can it hold? So this is a very fun and interactive way to learn how to get started with Kubernetes. And I would highly recommend choosing the chaotic evil route. So yeah, that's my story about how I learned Kubernetes. Woo. Fatima, how about you?
So this section of the talk was really hard for me to put together. I think no matter how much public speaking I do, talking about yourself on stage is like, I don't want to do that. So a lot of imposter syndrome, but I'm here because Daniel's here. So in the past 6 months, I've learned a lot about DevOps, monitoring, Kubernetes, but also about culture and methodologies. And it made me reflect back on different projects I've done before I ended up here and how there were parts of those that helped me understand DevOps. So I've worked a lot in and adjacent to open source in government, but one of the most notable projects that I was a lead on was this drone application at Transportation Canada. And this was for hobby drone pilots in Canada to be safe when they fly, know how to take a look at the site that they're flying at, you know, make sure that they're following all of the guidelines from the government. And in the process of putting this together in 9 months, we had to bridge the gap between the users on the ground, like citizens of Canada, the drone policy writers or the operations department, and then the IT department, and they were literally across the street from each other in minus 30 degrees Celsius. And so convincing all of those people to come to a table and then, you know, going through the process of user research, telling them that we couldn't give them the requirements for this application right up front. This was something that was going to be built over sprints, that we were going to consult our users. That was a lot of cultural transformation, and I think it really taught me how to work across different disciplines and start with challenges and things like that. And so I think about that when I hear people talk about DevOps cultural transformation. And then after that, I inherited a really big CI/CD script deployment project. It was used by over 400,000 customers, but it wasn't officially supported by the company. And so all of a sudden, I was like the maintainer of this open source script. There were a lot of people with a lot of strong opinions, and I didn't know how to stand my ground at all. So, you know, when you say PRs welcome, like I got all the PRs, and I accepted all the PRs because I didn't really know what I was doing. So it was like this big dragon, and it was like a battle that lasted for like a year, and eventually at the end I won, but you know, I came out with a lot of scars, but I learned a lot of lessons about like, you know, like you have to kind of set your boundaries, you have to decide what your vision for a project is, and then, you know, make mistakes and then learn from them, but don't forget that you're actually learning, and that should build your confidence. And then while doing that, I discovered that I really like teaching things, and I like teaching people to the point where they have that like light bulb moment. So I'm from the Drupal world. I've only been around for 6 months in the DevOps community, but in Drupal, I'm known for teaching object-oriented programming using Pokemon examples, and just the looks on people's faces as we go through this workshop where they're like, I don't really know. Oh my God, I understand. And so it was really exciting for me. And then another fun thing is I've taught more than I've contributed. So there are more commits to Drupal core that I've done through someone else that I was mentoring than I have actually done myself. So that was a really fun tidbit. And then finally, something that I'm working on now and learning from friends like Daniel and other people that I'm meeting in the community is taking more risks, like playing around with technology, not being afraid to do that in the public on a live stream, trying new approaches like streaming, sometimes with a partner, sometimes on a new podcast. And so I'm hoping to collaborate more across this new community. I've crash landed, but the plane's not burning anymore, so I feel like I'm ready to go. That's all we have for you today.
Woo! Thank you so much for coming to our talk. It's been a pleasure. I want to thank the organizers and the sponsor, lightstep.com, and you know, all the folks that are here joining us on Twitch as well as in person. Thank you so much, as well as the great folks who are doing our amazing emotes.
Yeah.
I think they are very, very on point.
Thank you, Ari and Abdullah.
Woo, thank you. Woo.
Thank you. That was a great talk. It's always nice to hear about like different perspectives of getting into the world in DevOps and SRE. And when you tie it into islands and exploring the Michigan side of islands, like it's even better.
Yeah, the pictures from the ferry were super great. So we really appreciate what you've shared with us. We had a couple questions. When you say that you want to do more learning in public, how do you encourage people that you're mentoring to learn in public? How do you make that easier to do?
You just do it with them. So if they are like, oh, I'm scared, I'm like, let's do it together. I think always, like, you don't have to do things by yourself, I think. The folks in the community are very, very friendly. I can DM Austin and be like, hey, like, can we do this together? And more than likely, he's gonna be like, yeah. So that's what I did with Fatima, like, in the beginning, like, because Fatima at first was like, oh, I'm not sure I'm like in the DevOps crowd yet. I'm like, why not just try, you know, like, let's do it together. So if someone's hesitant in your life to pursue something, just do it with them in the first time, just so like they don't get that initial scared, like, I don't know, I get really scared to do things for the first time. So trying to do it with them, I think, really helps.
That's a great answer.
I think it's also important to know like what they're interested in, and it might not be what you're interested in, and like connecting them with the people that you've met that can work with them, but like people that you really trust, you know, because you're like handing over a mentee, and it's got to be with someone that'll take care of them.
That makes sense. We got another question. How much of this like self-learning do you do in your own time, and how much in your boss's time? Because that's the problem. I'd love to share more, but like in what time?
So yeah, I think a lot of companies nowadays are doing a great thing, which is allocating part of their employees' paid time towards self-development. So like, make sure that you check with your bosses to see what that looks like at your company. But yeah, I personally do a lot of learning during work hours because that's part of my job responsibility. But a lot of my friends are actually trying to break into the DevOps space, so they're doing it in their part-time. So I think it's a very case-by-case basis.
So my short-lived career is 6 years long, and this is the first time, the last 6 months, that I have worked at an organization that doesn't just do lip service about giving you engineering time to contribute back. And so it's kind of a breath of fresh air, but I also don't quite believe it just yet. Don't tell my manager. But it's just like hard to believe because I've worked at these organizations that expected me to do like 110% of workload during my work time, and then also show up to events, contribute back to a core project, and do things like that in my personal time, and then profit off that. And so I never want to do that again. And I feel a lot of empathy to people who are stuck in those situations, and like offer support to help them get out, because it's not a good place to be where your employer is literally making money off of the contributions that you're doing, but they won't pay you for them. So yeah, I don't want to ever be there again.
Look at the emote though. So accurate. And me smiling is so accurate. I'm like, yes, I agree.
That it is very much real to just see like the interaction in person and then get to see the emojis happen. So definitely shout out to that. I was gonna mention that I'm also a huge fan of like learning in public and learning with others. And I think just as you shared in your journey today, like getting to explore with someone else just is a different feeling of like you're building a community around yourself, but you also get to show to others that you can do it. So like props to y'all for like exploring together, bringing us on and learning about that journey. One of the things that comes up for me with that is like imposter syndrome. Like I'm sure everyone in this room like talks about it all the time. Like how do you manage that? Like do you have any tips around like coming into a new island and like knowing that there's folks but you don't know how to go about it and like being in tech?
At least for me, I still have imposter syndrome every day. But having friends around you and a good support system really, really helps. So if you're feeling down, like having folks that can help you lift you up when you're not feeling as great is very helpful. But it's something that I think a lot of us suffer with. Even I've seen very high-level engineers that have been working for 30 years have imposter syndrome. I'm like, man, like I've been doing this for all of 2 years, and I'm like here not knowing what to do, and this guy knows everything and still suffering through imposter syndrome. So I don't think it's something that's easily solved, but I think having a support group really helps.
I'll be honest with you, I was about to delete my entire story section about an hour ago. Like, I was like, nope, can't do it, don't belong, can't take up space on this stage. And like, it was too late at that point. So that was like a good thing. Like, it was already too late. But I think I have this like set of agreements that I do with myself when I leave like a community that I'm used to, which the last 6 months I've had to like start from scratch. And it's like a combination of things. And I think everyone else should set their own personal agreements. But for some of them, for me, is like, when you finish, you decide on you're going to do a presentation. A week before, that's it, hands off. Like, you loved it at the time, trust yourself that you put together this talk and that it's going to be great. And like, don't listen to other people's talks and then start editing your story, right? And like, your story is valid. And a couple of things like, don't take things personally, and like, go out there and put yourself out there. And if it doesn't work out, like, have that support system that Daniel was talking about to go like, hey, like, I tried to jump into this like group and didn't feel great, and like, maybe find another group. And so I do a lot of reflecting at events like these where I'm meeting a lot of new people. So.
That's great. And I mean, thank you for sharing your story, because like, I'm a huge fan of representation matters. And like, if you don't see folks talking about how they got into it or the work they do, like, you can't be it. So thank you for keeping it, and thanks for your time not letting you delete it. As you say of like finding that community, like, thanks for folks coming and finding the DI DevOps community, but we know that like, you might be here on Twitch. How do you connect with other folks? Like, how do you go about just messaging Justin Garrison? Like, do you just find them on GitHub, on Twitter, LinkedIn?
For me, Twitter is the best. LinkedIn gets a little messy for all of us that are working because there's a lot of recruiters reaching out. So I think Twitter is the quickest way I've gotten a hold of folks. And I think the best way to start creating these connections is just start building yourself. Because when you start building things on different things like Kubernetes, you're going to have questions. And I think that's a really good icebreaker, is you having a question for someone that you're trying to connect with. So there's like something to talk about when you connect with them. So I think that's a good example of what I would do.
I love that. I'm notorious for, my friends joke, this is the analogy they give me, is I plant myself next to a person and bloom. Like, I'm like this flower, and I just come over and I'm like, my roots are right here. I'm going to be next to you for a long time. You're going to get used to me. So I just slide into people's DMs and say like, hi, I'm new. I really liked your talk. Like, it was awesome. I have no questions. I just wanted to say that. And sometimes those people come back after a year and they're like, I remember you. You were like super hyped about my talk. I also like live tweet talks that I really like, that, speakers like it, I think, but also I learn a lot. And so that kind of makes me memorable. But I understand that I have a very extroverted personality, and I think Daniel does as well. So I'm not sure that our advice will work for everyone. I hope other speakers can chime into that particular question as well in the Q&A, because I think different things work for different people, and not everyone can just like jump into Justin's DMs.
All right. Thank you both so much. That was great. We appreciate you speaking with us.